It had been a long, grueling day at the auto repair shop, and Marcus was looking forward to getting home. The storm outside was relentless, and the low hum of his truck engine was a comforting sound as he drove through the wet, winding roads of his neighborhood. But as he rounded a bend, something caught his eye, a set of blinking hazard lights in the distance. His instincts kicked in and he slowed down, pulling over behind a silver sedan parked on the shoulder. A woman stood beside the car looking frazzled, her hood drawn tight over her head. The rain had soaked her, and she was visibly shivering. Her eyes met his, filled with both relief and something else, a quiet desperation. "Please, I can't get my car started and my phone's dead," she said, her voice tense as though speaking too loudly might attract unwanted attention. Marcus stepped out of his truck, the sound of his boots splashing in the puddles around him. "No worries," he said, trying to ease her nerves. "I can help. You don't have to wait for a tow." She gave a shaky nod, watching him with cautious eyes. As he worked, she seemed nervous, glancing around as if expecting something or someone. Her face was pale, and though she thanked him repeatedly for his help, there was a guardedness in her demeanor that made Marcus uneasy. When he finished, she handed him a sleek business card with Rebecca King printed on it in gold. There was a single phone number, no company name. "Please take it. If you ever need anything, just call," she said, almost urgently. Marcus hesitated but pocketed the card, unsure why he felt so unsettled. She got into her car, her eyes still flickering nervously around, and drove off into the night, her taillights disappearing into the storm. Marcus watched her leave, the strange feeling that had been growing in his chest deepening. Something didn't add up, but he couldn't place what. The next morning, Marcus couldn't shake the lingering feeling from the night before. He had helped people before, but something about Rebecca's quick departure and the urgency in her voice felt off. He pulled her business card from his wallet as he ate breakfast, running his fingers over the smooth surface of the card. There was no name of a company, no indication of what Rebecca did, just her name and a phone number. He considered calling her just to check if she made it home safely, but then he stopped himself. It wasn't his business, was it? She hadn't asked for help after he fixed her tire, so why should he follow up? He tucked the card back into his wallet and went about his day, hoping the feeling would pass. But all day at the shop, he found himself distracted. Every time he reached for his phone, the card was there, a subtle reminder of the encounter. Later that night, as he sat on the couch, the unease returned. Was he overthinking things? Perhaps. But he couldn't ignore how uncomfortable her body language had been. The way she kept glancing over her shoulder, her breath quickening when he finished the tire change. It wasn't just a flat tire. It was as though she was trying to escape something, or someone. With a sigh, he tossed the card onto the coffee table, but sleep didn't come easy. His mind kept wandering back to that look she had given him before she drove off. A look that said so much more than "thank you." A look that seemed to warn him. Warn him of what? Marcus couldn't say, but he found himself wide awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling like something was coming. Days passed and Marcus tried to return to his routine, but the feeling that something wasn't right kept gnawing at him. One afternoon, as he was leaving the shop, he saw a familiar sight across the street, a black SUV parked in front of the building. Its windows were tinted, but he could make out the shape of two men sitting inside. They didn't seem to be doing anything in particular, just waiting, watching. He couldn't shake the connection to Rebecca. Was it possible these men were somehow tied to her? His mind raced, wondering if they were keeping an eye on him. Maybe it was paranoia. He didn't know, but every time he glanced out the window, the SUV was still there. He tried to ignore it, hoping it was just a coincidence. But as he left work that evening, the vehicle was still parked in the same spot, its engine running but otherwise motionless. That night he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, restless. The unease settled deeper in his bones. He couldn't stop thinking about that moment when Rebecca handed him the business card. Her urgency, her fear. Had he just helped someone in trouble? Or had he unknowingly become part of something much larger than a simple roadside rescue? He tossed and turned, the weight of it pressing on him, and every creak of the house seemed louder in the silence. What was he missing? And more importantly, why did he feel like someone was always watching? The next day, Marcus woke up to find himself scanning the street outside his house, almost expecting the black SUV to be parked in the same place. To his relief, it was gone. But when he pulled into the shop parking lot later that afternoon, he saw it again, this time across the street, parked in the shadows. He tried to convince himself it was just coincidence, but that familiar feeling of being watched crept up on him again. This time he took a different route, avoiding the SUV as much as possible, but his unease only deepened. Later that evening, as he sat in his truck preparing to leave work, one of the men from the SUV approached. His expression was calm but intense. "Marcus," he began, his voice smooth but firm. "We need to ask you some questions about the woman you helped last week, Rebecca King." Marcus felt a jolt of panic, his stomach tightening. He had no idea what was going on, but he knew this was serious. The man went on to ask detailed questions about Rebecca's behavior, if she'd seemed fearful, if she'd mentioned anyone following her. Marcus answered as honestly as he could, though he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being drawn into something far deeper than a simple car problem. "Listen," the man said, handing him a card with a single phone number. "If she reaches out to you again, call us immediately. It's for your safety." Before Marcus could respond, the man turned and walked back to the SUV, which drove off without a word. Marcus stood there, rooted to the spot, his mind racing. Who were these men? And why had they been watching him? He felt a wave of dread settle in his chest. Whatever Rebecca the next morning, Marcus was unable to focus at work. His mind kept replaying the events of the previous night. The men in the black SUV, their probing questions, and the sense that something dangerous was lurking just beneath the surface. He tried to push the thoughts aside, focusing on the task at hand, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. That afternoon, as he was working on an engine in the back of the shop, he heard the sound of a car pulling up. He turned around to see a familiar figure standing in the doorway. Rebecca. She was drenched, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. Without a word, she rushed inside, her breathing ragged as if she had run from something or someone. "Marcus," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I need your help." Before he could speak, the door slammed open, and the same two men from the SUV stepped inside. They didn't say a word, but their eyes locked onto Rebecca with a chilling intensity. The tension in the room was palpable, thick with unspoken threats. Rebecca's eyes darted around the room, as if searching for an escape. "Rebecca," the first man said in a low, controlled voice, "you can't hide forever." Marcus felt his heart racing as Rebecca backed away slowly. This was no coincidence anymore. He had just stepped into something far bigger, and now he was part of it. Kie was running from it, had now found its way into his life. The next morning, Marcus was unable to focus at work. His mind kept replaying the events of the previous night, the men in the black SUV, their probing questions, and the sense that something dangerous was lurking just beneath the surface. He tried to push the thoughts aside, focusing on the task at hand, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. That afternoon, as he was working on an engine in the back of the shop, he heard the sound of a car pulling up. He turned around to see a familiar figure standing in the doorway. Rebecca. She was drenched, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. Without a word, she rushed inside, her breathing ragged as if she had run from something or someone. "Marcus," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "I need your help." Before he could speak, the door slammed open, and the same two men from the SUV stepped inside. They didn't say a word, but their eyes locked onto Rebecca with a chilling intensity. The tension in the room was palpable, thick with unspoken threats. Rebecca's eyes darted around the room as if searching for an escape. "Rebecca," the first man said in a low, controlled voice, "you can't hide forever." Marcus felt his heart racing as Rebecca backed away slowly. This was no coincidence anymore. He had just stepped into something far bigger, and now he was part of it. Marcus's mind raced as he stood between Rebecca and the two men. The tension in the room was thick, and he could feel his heartbeat pounding in his ears. He had no idea what was happening, but he knew one thing. These men weren't here for a friendly chat. He glanced at Rebecca, whose face was pale, her hands shaking as she backed away, positioning herself behind Marcus as if he were her last line of defense. The taller of the two men stepped forward, his eyes cold and calculating. "Marcus," he said smoothly, as if they were having a casual conversation. "We're not here to cause any trouble. We just need Ms. King to come with us. You don't need to get involved." Marcus swallowed hard, trying to maintain a calm facade. "Look, I don't know what's going on here," he said, his voice steady but his nerves frayed. "I just helped her with her car. That's it. Whatever this is, I want no part of it." The man gave a slight nod, his gaze unwavering. "We understand that, Marcus. But you see, Ms. King is in possession of certain information that she shouldn't have. Information that belongs to some very powerful people." His voice was smooth, almost too smooth, as if he were used to persuading people into compliance. "If you want to keep yourself and those you care about safe, you'll do the smart thing and step aside." Rebecca's grip tightened on his arm and he could feel her trembling. He didn't know what she had gotten herself into, but he could sense the danger in the man's words. These weren't ordinary thugs. They were professionals, and their calm, controlled demeanor only made them more intimidating. Rebecca leaned in close, her voice barely a whisper. "Marcus, please, don't let them take me. If they do, I won't make it out alive." Her words were a desperate plea, and he could feel the raw fear in her tone. He didn't know why he felt compelled to help her, but he couldn't ignore the terror in her eyes. Marcus took a deep breath, turning back to the men. "She's not going anywhere," he said firmly, his voice low but resolute. The man's expression darkened, his patience wearing thin. "Marcus, we're trying to do this the easy way. Don't make this difficult for yourself." The second man, who had been silent until now, took a step forward, reaching into his jacket. Marcus tensed, his mind racing. He had no weapon, nothing to defend himself with, but he wasn't about to let these men take Rebecca without a fight. Just then, the door behind them swung open, and a customer entered, momentarily disrupting the standoff. The two men exchanged a glance, their expressions unreadable. After a tense pause, the taller man spoke again, his tone cold and final. "This isn't over, Marcus. We'll be watching." With that, they turned and left, their footsteps echoing in the silence of the shop. Marcus felt a wave of relief, but he knew this was only temporary. As soon as the door closed behind them, he turned to Rebecca, his mind racing with questions. "What have you gotten yourself into?" he asked, his voice a mix of frustration and concern. Rebecca looked down, her face filled with guilt and fear. "I'm so sorry, Marcus. I didn't mean to drag you into this, but I had no one else to turn to." She hesitated, her voice barely a whisper. "There's so much I can't explain, but I need your help. Please." The weight of Rebecca's words hung in the air, and Marcus knew he was in too deep to turn back now. Every instinct told him to walk away, to let her deal with whatever mess she had created. But something about her fear, her vulnerability, tugged at him. He couldn't bring himself to leave her to face those men alone. "All right," he said finally, running a hand through his hair. "What do we do now? Do you have somewhere safe you can go?" Rebecca shook her head, her eyes filled with dread. "They know every place I could possibly hide. They have resources, people everywhere. I thought I could stay one step ahead, but they've found me every time." She paused, her voice barely audible. "I thought I could trust someone to help me, someone powerful, but even they turned on me." Marcus felt a surge of anger toward these men and whoever else was behind them. He didn't know the full story, but he could tell Rebecca was terrified, hunted. He decided that for now, he'd help her, at least until they could figure out a plan. "Let's get out of here," he said, nodding toward the back exit. He led Rebecca through the back alley, where his truck was parked. "We'll go somewhere they won't expect." They climbed into the truck and Marcus drove off, keeping an eye on his rearview mirror. They navigated through side streets and took several detours, trying to avoid any tails. But as they merged onto the main road, he spotted a familiar vehicle several cars behind them, the black SUV. "They're following us," he muttered, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. Rebecca's face paled. "They're relentless. They won't stop until they have what they're looking for." Marcus clenched his jaw, feeling a surge of determination. "Then let's make it hard for them." He accelerated, weaving through traffic, his eyes darting between the road and the SUV in his mirror. He pushed the truck to its limits, taking sharp turns and cutting through narrow alleys, but the SUV stayed on their tail, closing in. After a harrowing chase, Marcus managed to lose them by cutting through a construction zone and merging onto a different highway. He kept driving until they reached the outskirts of town, pulling into an abandoned gas station. He turned off the engine, and for a few moments they sat in silence, catching their breath. Rebecca looked at him, her expression filled with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "Thank you, Marcus. I don't know how much longer I can keep running." He met her gaze, feeling a strange sense of responsibility. "Then maybe it's time to stop running and start fighting back." As they sat in the dim light of the abandoned gas station, Marcus turned to Rebecca. "I need to know what we're dealing with. Who are these guys? Why are they after you?" Rebecca hesitated, her eyes reflecting a deep sadness. "They're not just any men, Marcus. They work for a powerful company that's involved in illegal dealings, money laundering, insider trading, you name it. I was one of their top financial advisors until I discovered the extent of their corruption. I tried to report them, but they found out, and now they want me gone." Marcus listened, his mind racing as he pieced together the danger they were in. This wasn't just a case of her knowing too much. This was an operation with powerful people willing to do anything to protect their secrets. He realized the two men were likely only the beginning. As he processed her words, a sudden sound broke the silence. A car pulled into the gas station, and Marcus tensed, his hand instinctively moving toward the door handle. But instead of the black SUV, it was an older, beat-up sedan. A man stepped out, looking around cautiously before approaching them. "Rebecca," he called, his voice low but urgent. Rebecca's eyes widened in surprise, and she quickly got out of the truck, running toward him. "I didn't think you'd actually come." The man nodded, glancing around nervously. "I'm taking a huge risk just being here, but I couldn't sit back and watch you be hunted. I have some information that could help you, but we have to move fast. They're onto me too." Marcus watched as the two exchanged information, realizing this man was an unexpected ally in their fight. With his help, they gained access to key files and insider knowledge about the organization hunting Rebecca. It was a glimmer of hope, but it came with a cost. As they left the gas station, Marcus knew that with every step, they were inching closer to a final confrontation, one that could either end their nightmare or seal their fate. The abandoned cabin where Marcus, Rebecca, and her contact, Evan, were hiding was cloaked in the thick silence of the forest. Located miles outside the city, it was a place no one would easily find. Marcus parked the truck behind the trees, and the three of them hurried inside, every nerve on edge. The forest around them felt like it was holding its breath, as if it, too, sensed the danger that loomed closer with each passing moment. Evan, a wiry man with sharp eyes and a perpetually nervous expression, immediately spread out documents across the dusty wooden table. "Look, we don't have much time, but these files contain all the evidence we need," he whispered, pointing to charts, emails, and transaction records. "This organization has been laundering billions. I managed to get my hands on documents that connect the dots. This could bring them down if it gets into the right hands." Rebecca's face was pale but determined. She looked at the files, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "With this, they'll have to answer for everything. It's enough to make every one of them go down." Marcus studied the documents, but his mind was elsewhere, focused on the sound of leaves rustling in the woods outside, the crackling of twigs underfoot. He sensed they weren't alone. "How safe is this place?" he asked, his voice tense. "It's off the grid," Evan replied, though his tone was uncertain. "They shouldn't know we're here. But we need to move fast." As Rebecca and Evan sifted through the evidence, Marcus kept watch at the cabin window. His gaze darted from shadow to shadow, every sound amplified by the tension in his mind. He knew they were being hunted, and it wouldn't be long before the organization's enforcers found them. Then, a faint glint of metal caught his eye, a gun barrel protruding from the bushes about 50 yards away. His breath caught, and his heart pounded as he instinctively dropped to the floor, motioning for Rebecca and Evan to do the same. "They're here," he whispered urgently. "We have to go. Now." A shot rang out, shattering the silence. The bullet tore through the cabin window, embedding itself in the wall just inches from where they had been standing moments earlier. Evan grabbed the documents and stuffed them into a bag, his hands shaking as he looked at Marcus and Rebecca with wide eyes. "They're not going to let us leave this place alive." The three of them crawled across the floor, staying low as more gunfire erupted outside. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, but his mind was sharp, focused. He had to get them out of here. "Back door," he whispered, leading them toward a narrow hallway that opened to the rear of the cabin. They burst out into the cold night air, sprinting through the dense undergrowth as gunfire continued to ring out behind them. The forest became a labyrinth, each twist and turn a potential hiding spot. Marcus led the way, his instincts guiding them through the maze of trees as they weaved in and out of cover, narrowly avoiding the flashes of light from their pursuers' flashlights. Rebecca stumbled over a root, nearly falling, but Marcus grabbed her arm, pulling her forward. "Stay with me," he urged, his voice steady but firm. They pressed on, their breaths coming in sharp, ragged gasps. The sounds of footsteps and voices grew louder, and Marcus knew they were closing in. His mind raced, searching for any possible way out. Finally, he spotted a small ravine up ahead, partially concealed by the thick foliage. "This way," he whispered, guiding them down into the ravine. They crouched behind a fallen tree, catching their breath as they listened to their pursuers pass by just feet above them. The men shouted to each other, their voices filled with frustration as they searched for any sign of the trio. As the footsteps faded, Marcus turned to Rebecca and Evan, his expression grim. "They're not going to stop until they have us, or until we stop them." Evan nodded, clutching the bag of documents as if it were his lifeline. "I know someone who can take this and release it to the public, someone they can't touch. If we can get to him, this could all be over." Rebecca glanced at Marcus, her eyes filled with both gratitude and determination. "I know I've put you through so much, but if we get out of this, it'll all be worth it. We can finally expose them." Marcus looked between them, feeling the weight of what they were attempting. "Then let's move. We've got one last shot to make this right." With a renewed sense of purpose, they crept out of the ravine, navigating through the forest as quietly as possible. The sounds of their pursuers had faded, but Marcus knew it wouldn't be long before they were back on their trail. They needed to find a way out of the forest fast. As they emerged onto a narrow dirt road, Marcus spotted an old, abandoned truck parked a short distance away. He glanced at Rebecca and Evan, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "Looks like we've got a ride." They climbed into the truck and Marcus hot-wired it, the engine roaring to life. As they sped down the road, he couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. They had a chance. A slim one, but a chance nonetheless. All they had to do was make it to the contact without getting caught. But as they rounded a bend, headlights appeared behind them. The black SUV. They had found them again. The chase was relentless, the black SUV matching them turn for turn as they tore down the narrow road. Marcus gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white as he tried to keep the truck from skidding on the uneven terrain. Rebecca clung to the seat beside him, her face pale but resolute, while Evan held tightly to the bag of documents, his expression grim. "Can you lose them?" Rebecca asked, her voice strained but steady. Marcus nodded, determination flashing in his eyes. Hold on. He took a sharp turn, veering off the main road and onto a rugged, overgrown path that wound through the dense forest. The truck bounced and jolted over rocks and roots, but Marcus kept a steady hand, his focus unwavering. The SUV followed, its headlights casting an eerie glow over the trees as it pursued them through the darkness. Ahead, Marcus spotted a narrow river cutting through the forest. Without hesitation, he veered toward it, driving the truck straight into the shallow water. The vehicle splashed through the river, sending a spray of water up around them as Marcus navigated downstream. The SUV slowed at the river's edge, hesitating, and Marcus seized the opportunity to put some distance between them. They emerged on the other side of the river, the forest opening up into a clearing where a small dirt road wound its way back toward the city. Marcus pushed the truck to its limits, driving as fast as he could, his eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror. But as they neared the outskirts of town, a feeling of hope began to blossom. The SUV was nowhere in sight, and the city lights loomed ahead, promising a semblance of safety. Marcus glanced at Rebecca, who gave him a tired but grateful smile. "We did it," she whispered, her voice filled with both relief and disbelief. But the journey wasn't over yet. Evan's contact was waiting at a small, nondescript cafe on the edge of town, a place where secrets could be traded without attracting attention. Marcus parked the truck a few blocks away, and the three of them walked the rest of the way, keeping to the shadows as they approached the meeting spot. Inside, Evan's contact, a middle-aged journalist with a reputation for exposing corruption, was waiting, his expression serious as he took the documents from Evan. He promised to get the information out, to make sure the truth was known. For the first time in days, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, they were finally safe. As they left the cafe, the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, casting a warm glow over the city. Rebecca turned to Marcus, her eyes filled with gratitude and something else, something unspoken, but deeply felt. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but filled with emotion. "You didn't have to help me, but you did. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Marcus gave a small, tired smile, the weight of the past few days settling over him. "You already have. Just take care of yourself. And make sure this was worth it." Rebecca nodded, a promise in her gaze. She and Evan said their goodbyes, disappearing into the early morning light, leaving Marcus alone in the quiet street. He watched them go, a sense of both relief and sadness filling him. As he walked back to his truck, he couldn't help but feel changed by the experience. He had faced danger, taken risks, and in doing so, he had found a strength within himself he hadn't known existed. The world was still dark, filled with shadows, but he had proven to himself that he could stand against it. When he returned to his life, everything seemed a little different. The usual sounds of the repair shop, the smell of grease and oil, even the daily routine. It all felt strangely comforting, like a reminder that he had made it through something he never thought he would face. And though he knew he'd probably never see Rebecca again, he knew he had done the right thing. The black SUV, the men in suits, the shadowy organization, they had faded into the background, defeated by the truth Rebecca and Evan had exposed. For the first time in days, Marcus felt a sense of peace. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew one thing: he would face it, no matter what came.